bring to order the school board workshop to discuss with the Sheriff's Department a contract for resource officers. We'll start with the presentation by Everett Carl.
Thank you, Dr. Paulson. I have prepared a very short presentation for you all, really, much as anything, just to provide a little context for your discussion today, give you some information, and say up front there's some math in it, and I've tried to check all my figures, double check them, but
You probably didn't have a great algebra teacher.
with a little disclaimer.
I could have. I know there was one in this district.
There was at least one, Dr. Paulson. So let me just start with a little context for this. I think we've been through this dance before, but we've had agreement with originally with the Sheriff's Department and GPD for school resource officer programs that in this county I know that have gone back at least 30 years. Someone asked me about 2 months ago if I could find out exactly how long, and we went down to finance, and it's been over 30 years at least that we've had these programs. Prior to 2012 and 2013, the Sheriff's Department provided 16 deputies, and those deputies were divided among middle and high schools only, regardless of city limits. GPD provided 6 officers, and those were divided among GHS, 1 high school, and the 2 center schools at that time was Aquin, Jones, and Horizon. And then GPD also provided an officer friendly that served among the city elementary schools.
Did they also give Howard Bishop in Westwood?
At that time, the Sheriff's Department did Howard Bishop and Westwood. They did all the middle schools.
The
and
3
all,
middle schools in the city.
Correct, yes sir, that's correct. So at that time, and again, I've gone back on some of our records to look at this, and I think this is all accurate, but at that time, the combined cost for the 2 contracts was a little over $600,000. You all will remember in December 2012, we had the horrific event at Sandy Hook Elementary in Connecticut, and at that time, that happened very close to Christmas break, and at that time, decision was made over the Christmas break to staff all of the schools in the county, all the elementary schools, with a deputy. The sheriff at that time made some changes to her staffing and shifted deputies into the elementary schools. GPD also increased coverage in the city elementary schools, but they did not do still on a 1-to-1 ratio as the sheriff had done in the county. The following summer we had some contract negotiations, and there was an agreement to increase the cost of the SRO programs because of the additional coverage that was being provided in the elementary schools by the Sheriff's Department and by the city of Gainesville. In
That's when we met up in conference room E, right?
Excuse me?
We had a meeting in conference room E.
Well, we had some meetings, and I think I'm going to get to that at this point. We had in 2014, the sheriff got a request from the Board of County Commissioners to increase the share of funding that she was getting from the school board, and so we entered into. I think at that time.
I just remember the meeting because we went back and forth for.
That was the meeting we had in conference room E. It was in E, and it was attended by some representatives from the Sheriff's Department as well as Board of County Commissioners. But if you remember, there were some discussions about that. We had, at that time, the sheriff made some presentations with regard to her cost of the program, and there was notations that the estimate that we were paying 42% of her cost, and the cost per deputy at that time was $26,269 being paid by the school board. In subsequent negotiations, Superintendent Roberts was concerned, of course, with the budget, overall budget, and turned to the safe school allocation, which prior to that time had been used to pay for not only school resource deputies, but had also been used to pay for other safety measures in the schools, such as fencing and things of that sort. But he agreed to take all of that money and share it among any of the agencies that were willing to provide resource officers in the school. There was a change in how we staffed the schools after that point, because municipal police departments in High Springs and Alachua requested to be a part of the program, and so the schools that were in High Springs and Alachua that had previously been covered by the sheriff's office were now being covered by the municipal police forces in High Springs and Alachua, and that continues to exist to this day. As I just said, prior to 13-14, we used safe school funding for not just the cost of the resource officer program, but also for some other measures. But following the decision by Dr. Roberts, all of those funds were put into these to the SRO program. And I've got some charts coming a little later that'll show you what those was. So if you just bear with me a minute, we'll get to that. In 13-14 and in 14-15, because of the increased costs, there was, and prior to the decision by Dr. Roberts to use the entire Safe School funds, we were supplementing that program out of the general revenue funds. But then in 2015-2016, only Safe School allocation was utilized to fund the program, the School Resource Officer program. This chart on slide 6 gives you the cost breakdown for the programs since the year 2012-13. The first column is the Safe School funds, and note that that is the district share of the funds. We're required by law to give charter schools a proportionate share of those funds. So they get a share of the Safe School funds, and then we get a share based off of the number of students that are being served in their respective schools. You can see that amount has remained somewhat constant. It dropped down just below $800,000 in 14-15, but it's remained around low 800,000s. You can see the next cost column is the cost that we were devoting to the contracts for the school resource officer programs. In 12-13, when we had just the sheriff's department and just the city, and before Sandy Hook, it was $612,000 into contracts, and then the remainder of that money was spent on metal detectors, fencing cameras, and things of that sort. Then the following 2 years, we supplemented with general funds because the cost exceeded the cost for the contracts. And then beginning in 15-16 and in the 2 subsequent school years afterwards, we devoted all of the funds that we had to the programs. The next 4 columns over are the contract costs for each of the agencies. And you'll see that prior to 15-16, it was only the 2, it was the sheriff's office and the police department, local police department in Gainesville. And then beginning in 15-16, we included the 2 outlying rural police forces. The following slide 7, gives basically the cost that we have paid to the sheriff's department over the years and the number of deputies assigned to schools. You can see that number has fluctuated based on, again, going back to 12-13, when they covered just the middle schools and high schools, and GPD only covered 3 schools, and then in 13-14, 14-15, there was an increase because the sheriff was covering elementary schools across the county to include High Springs, Alachua, Irby, Newberry, the rural schools. Then in 15-16, when the rural agencies got involved, the number of deputies were decreased, mainly because the sheriff was covering less schools. But you can see the cost per deputy over in the next column. With the 2018-2019 proposed amount that we've proposed for the sheriff's contract for this upcoming school year. Again, just a couple of more quick bullet points here, and then I'll get to some more numbers. just to understand how the contracts were done, prior to 15-16, contract costs were based on a number of officers, deputies provided by each agency. And then there was an additional training cost that we also budgeted into the contract. In 15-16 and 17-18, we continued to base it on the number of deputies or officers that were being provided based on a proportionate share. The big difference came in 2015 when we added the rural departments, and because each agency was not staffing schools at the same ratio, we went to a per school cost. So if the sheriff's department covered a certain number of schools, they got a share for each one of those schools that were covered. It wasn't based on a per officer cost. For this year, current contract, upcoming year, we return to a per officer cost, mainly because the law now requires that there be an officer in each school. So there was no longer an option for an agency to share schools, if you will. And so we continue to look at the total safe school allocation for this year. We did deduct the cost out of that for the school district security specialist, which is also required in statute. And as we've always done, we have to give the charter schools their allocation. And again, I've got a slide coming up that shows you the amounts for that allocation. We currently have negotiated and fully executed agreements with GPD, Alachua Police, and High Springs Department for 2018-19 based on this 37-7, and I think that's incorrect there. It should be 755 and not 775. So that's many times I've looked at that. There's still an error there, but it's 37,755. Percent increase, which you'll see on the next slide, is reflective of the fact that we went to a per officer deputy funding scheme. I want to just note that GPD, they added 5 officers to what they were covering for last year.
So they're not sharing schools?
Pardon me?
Because now they're not sharing schools.
Correct. That is correct. Last year they had some, in places like, for instance, at places like where we had elementary schools that were real close to each other, or schools that were close to each other. Howard Bishop and Metcalf was an example. They would share between those schools. For this upcoming year, the GPD's plan is to have a dedicated officer to each school. Again, this is a little historical information. 2017-18, the last school year, the overall contract cost for all of the agencies was $806,589. 2018-2019, we have allocated from the Safe School money $1.623 million to the cost, and then the breakout across each column is what the contract costs are for each agency. At 30, again, calculated at 37,755 per officer being provided. The difference row there is the difference in what we spent last year and what we have proposed for this year's spending, and then the percent increase shows the percent increase over last year's funding for each agency. Again, if you look across this, there is some differences in agencies in the percentage. A lot of this is reflective of the fact that we went to a per officer funding model. I'll give you a good example of that. The sheriff provided 2 officers at Eastside and 2 deputies at Buchholz. Last year, because we were funding per school, we shared it per school, so even though she had 2 and 2, it was a per school share. This year, the fact that she's got 2 at each school means there's 2 officers we recognize there's 2 officers there. And so each agency got a share based on the number of officers they're putting in the schools, which are at least 1-to-1 at all schools across the district, with the exception of the high schools. The 2 big high schools, Buchholz, Eastside, GHS, have 2 each, and also our center school, Lakeland Jones, has 2 officers assigned. This is the counter proposal. I think you all are aware you've received some documentation in your email and with your packets today from the Sheriff's Department, and I know her department's worked hard to provide accurate information on this, and we've had several exchanges over the last few weeks, but I think you've got the latest copy of the spreadsheet that she provided, what her proposed costs are, and what she is proposing in terms of a contract arrangement with the school district. I want to note, I've calculated this on 18 officers and deputies, and if you note in her proposal, she has 20 because she's planned on having a couple of extra deputies to serve as reserves. But we, nevertheless, using 18 as a per officer cost, it works out to 61,686 per officer compared to the 37,755 that we had in our proposed contract and the existing contracts that we have with the other 3 agencies. And then if you look over on the far right is the percent increase based on the proposal at this time from what we paid in 2017, 2018. This is kind of a hypothetical slide, but I just wanted to give you all the information because I think the assumption is if we renegotiate or accept a contract from the sheriff with increased amounts, we would probably need to do the same thing with the other 3 agencies that are providing resource officers in our schools. So using the 61,686 per officer share, this is how it would calculate out across all of the agencies that we have providing services. So the total cost column, as you can see, will increase to a little over $2.6 million. The difference from the current proposed contract with the Sheriff's Department and the 3 existing contracts we have in place now with the other 3 agencies is a little over $1 million. The notes at the bottom gives you the in red there is the potential impact to the general fund if we renegotiate these contracts at that rate. Just a final couple of thoughts. In the negotiations that we've had both back in 2014 and currently, and also in some conversations that I've had with the other agencies in terms of how they calculate their costs, there is a difference in how those costs are calculated. In other words, each agency does not calculate costs for the program in the same way. And just as a few examples, you know, the sheriff is calculating in her costs the cost for her supervisory staff, cost for the program over 12 months, cost for, as I've mentioned earlier, a couple of deputies to serve as substitutes, as well as the way she calculates cost on equipment and how that's prorated. The point here is that we're going to look at some sort of a share of cost. I think there would have to be some standardization of how that's done because we've got 3 other agencies that all calculate it in a different manner. Right now, there are some options that you may want to consider. One is, of course, that we could accept the counter proposal, supplement the Safe School funds with general operation dollars, which are, you know, the dollars that we use to fund our general education, classroom programs, and personnel. But with the notation, as I've mentioned earlier, that we would probably need to renegotiate with the current agencies that we have contracts with, because there would obviously be a big difference in the cost of those contracts in terms of what we're paying. The second option would be to reject or further negotiate with the sheriff on her proposal. The last bullet, really, what I've given you here is the options that the state provides in statute. The one I haven't included is that we could, of course, contract, as we're doing with agencies for SROs, SRDs. The second option the state gives us is that we can contract certified law enforcement personnel either from an existing agency, or we could hire our own school safety officers, which some districts do. They would have to, of course, meet the state training requirements. And then the final option is the school guardian program, which I think you all have already discussed. That is where we arm one of our employees, and I think the board has already said that they're not interested in doing that. And I think might add that across the state, my experience is there has not been a lot of interest from school boards, except from some of the very small districts in the Guardian program. We do have some charter schools that are interested in it, and I know we're working with the Sheriff's Department now they're scrambling to get training in place to see how charter schools are going to deal with this. That's the presentation. I don't know whether you all have any questions for me. If you do, I'll be glad to answer them. I know the sheriff is here and she has some representatives, so you may want to have questions for her.
All right, thank you. Any board members? Have anything else?
Well, I have a comment.
All right, Mr. Hyatt.
What I'm looking at here is that They're sort of, the immediate need is to make sure that we have the best security in place when school opens this August. But I believe that concurrently, we need to be looking at August 2019. And so we do what we have to do to make sure we're good this year, but consider some of the other options that Mr. Cottle mentioned as a way to move forward that's something the district can afford. So I'm going to certainly depend on information from Assistant Superintendent Rella in his office, and also from the superintendent to help guide us in those areas. So, but I think that the time to plan for 2019 is immediately following when we settle what we're going to do for 2018.
Who else? Anybody? Ms. Roy?
I have just a couple of questions. Mr. Cottle, you mentioned that each agency figures their costs differently, and that's on the final thoughts page
Yes.
here. And so we have 4 supervisory staff for the sheriff's office. What is that? How does the GPD figure that? I mean, how many?
I'd have to go back and look at the document they sent me, but I think they only look at, they have 2 sergeants, I think they assigned to this program. And I'm not sure that they even include all of their salaries in that, because those folks may have some additional duties besides SROs. Alachua has not given us a breakdown of how they figure in staff, but in my conversations with them, they have at least 1 sergeant that they dedicate to the program that, again, at least part of that person's time is dealing with the SRO program. High Springs only looks at the cost of their officer that they have there, because they only have 1 school to cover, and they do not have a separate juvenile bureau or the other costs that are also different, you know, again, and again, some of this is just in conversations I've had with the different agencies. When you look at how equipment is allocated and what equipment is allocated and what is counted in those costs. I think the sheriff has provided you all a pretty detailed list of what she calculates in with her cost. I know in the conversations I've had with GPD, a lot of those equipment costs are not factored into theirs. So it's just, the point I was trying to make in this is that there's this concept that's been sort of floated across the state that there needs to be a shared cost, but there's really been no standardized method of calculating what the cost of this program is in terms of, you know, I think what the sheriff's presented is what she believes to be her true cost to the program, and that may well be, but other agencies do not calculate it that way.
Okay, and one other, and you may have said this, but how many officers for GPD versus how many officers for ASO?
Yeah,
Just
that
in
is,
total.
GPD is providing 20 officers, 1 per school, with the exception of Aquin Jones. They provide 2. They also provide 2 for Gainesville High School. And then 1 officer in each elementary school and 1 officer in each middle school that's in the city limits.
And ASO is proposing 20.
ASO provides 18 in the schools. The sheriff in her proposal put 20 because she included 2
Yeah, I
deputies
understand.
that would function as substitutes in the event that existing deputies are out of the school. Right now, if GPD has an absence in the school, what they have committed to do is put 1 of the sergeants that they have that are supervising the program in that place for the day that
So
the person is
we
out.
have 18 for ASO with 4 supervisory staff and 20 for GPD with 2.
It's my understanding that they only count the 2 sergeants that they have at GPD.
Okay. And the cost of the program over 12 months is what the ASO is asking. Do we pay GPD for 12 or 9?
We actually only pay both agencies for 10 months. Now, the contracts are structured a little different. And again, I'd have to go back and look at them. I believe the sheriff bills over a 10-month period, whereas GPD bills over a 12-month period, mainly because their fiscal year is different. The Gainesville City fiscal year is a little different from ours, and so they don't really start billing for theirs until like October, and they bill all the way through because of the way their fiscal year works. But that being said, we are contracting for 10 months with all of the agencies. So if what we look at is we want the school staffed on day one of school in August, and then to carry it through the last.
So our contract that we have proposed to the Sheriff's Department covers 10 months, and she's requesting 12, is that it?
What we require is 10 months of service in the
Correct.
school. When the sheriff calculates her cost, she's calculated that, and again, she can probably answer this better than I can, but it's my understanding that she's calculated it over a 12-month period, with the understanding that she carries those deputies through the year, and there are there are some things in the summer that they're doing, but they're not in our schools during the 2 summer months.
Well, and I see by the cost of the 2 substitutes, their cost is about the same as the full-time. I'm just wondering what the substitutes do if there's no need to substitute. I mean, are they just sitting around waiting for someone to be absent? The full salary, $85,000?
Sure, would you like to respond to some questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caudell, and I appreciate your presentation and your work that you've put into it. Mr. Chair and members of the board, in direct answer to Ms. Roy's question, is the 2 substitutes were determined to be needed over the past several years. Most of you know that we have had deputies in the schools, the public school system, for decades, as Mr. Caudell mentioned. I believe our commitment has been proven and demonstrated time and time again. But again, in answer to your question, the need for substitutes came about because we have been doing what GPD is indicating that they're going to go to do. And that is when there's a vacancy in a school from the presence of one of our deputies, and there will be, because there'll be illnesses of that deputy, there'll be injuries, there'll be family illnesses, there'll be family commitments, there'll be time where that deputy has to be out of the school, much like when you have teachers that are out of the school. So a substitute is planned to be in place. What we did before was put a sergeant into the school, much like GPD is planning to do. That doesn't work. Because the sergeant has a huge amount of responsibilities. That's why they're a sergeant. The ratio for supervision in law enforcement typically nationally is 1 to 6 as far as the span of control, 1 supervisor to 6 personnel, because of the highly responsible work that they do, the requirements, the type of reports, the kind of scrutiny, the kind of making sure that they're covering all the bases when an incident occurs, and to make sure they're completing all the amounts of training that they're required to accomplish during the course of a school year, much of which is mandated. So what we found, we had some conversation on our one-on-ones with some of you, was that the majority of the time that sergeant was pulled away from their supervisory duties. So it became very apparent to us that we needed to have that substitute position to go in. Now, recognizing that they're not going to be substituting every single day, although that will be a good component of their time, the 2 substitutes have been training and have been issued a gun detection dog. And so when they're not in the schools functioning as a substitute, they will be going into the various schools throughout the county to make sure that they're screening for any guns or ammunition. They will do that on a scheduled basis, and they will do that on an unannounced basis frequently. We're hoping that that will have a chilling effect, and this is one of the first areas in the state of Florida that is using this specifically for school safety, is that it will have a chilling effect, especially for students or personnel on the school campuses of bringing in a firearm or ammunition into the school, presumably for their own protection or maybe for wrong purposes. So that substitute is a dual purpose position to complete the duties when a sergeant would normally be put in there, but it impacts on their duties. And if you're familiar with the Safe Schools Act, and I believe most of you are, there are additional requirements in that law for law enforcement to do, to be part of a risk assessment team at each school, to conduct active shooter and other drills as necessary on a more frequent basis in concert with the school officials. So not only are there added duties that they've had added to them since the time that we've learned that there's a need to have those two positions. I feel very strongly that we completely can justify those positions, and not to judge what GPD has done, but I think they will learn from that also. Now, the advantage that GPD has is they've got a tighter territory. They've got about 55 square miles. We've got 900 square miles to cover with the schools that are distributed throughout the 900 square miles. That makes it additionally difficult for a supervisor to supervise those deputies that are in the schools. Did I answer your question satisfactorily?
Well, yes. I accept your explanation. I don't agree with your reasoning.
I understand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start off by saying to the sheriff and her other personnel who are with her this morning, we thank you ever so much for all that you have done in the past years and all that you will continue to do, because we're all here as we sit here together and as you sit in the audience. We all want what's best for the children. And with everything that's going on in our nation, we certainly feel protected by what you're offering, not agreeing with everything, but what you are willing to do in response to keeping everyone safe, not only our children, but employees as well. So I wanted to start off with that. But when I look at Mr. Caudle's page 12 slide and go back to if we are going to especially divide in the manner in which you have, Mr. Caudle, that's an astronomical amount. That page 12, the slide 12.
Yeah. I think you're referring to the one I have displayed now.
Yes, sir, that's it. Where you have 1824-1. If we do that and you have the impact to our general fund well over $1 million, I don't even know how, and that will come later because the sheriff may want to say a little bit more about her printouts, but it's no way that we could afford. And I know this has been a wonderful presentation, and each of us had an opportunity to meet with the sheriff and speak basically when we had some weeks ago. But I don't even see how we can have all of the discussions that we want to have this morning. But when I look at this figure, knowing that we don't have the funds and the money, unless you go into contingency in some kind of way, I don't see how we could do that. And when I look at what High Springs and Alachua would be paid for 4 and 1, I'm just wondering if we should balance it in this manner. I don't know. I have so many questions going around right now thinking about this red figure that you put down there, Mr. Caudle.
Sure, and again, this is a a potential cost, this is assuming that we would renegotiate those contracts with High Springs, Alachua, Gainesville Police. I would suspect that if we agreed to the sheriff's proposal as it is, that those three agencies would come back to us and say, hey, this is a huge difference in what you're paying per officer for the sheriff and what you're paying for us currently. All of the contracts have clauses in it where we can renegotiate, and I'm sure that they would
I
request that
understand.
we renegotiate.
Right, and I can
Now,
understand.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, whether we calculated it at this amount or some other amount, but if we deviate from what we've proposed now, which is $37,755 per officer, my guess is that they're gonna come back and want us to recalculate what we're paying now. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
no, all I was gonna state, Mr. Cardle, I understand the fairness, and when you look at every, department for, safety purposes, and I would think if I were at Alachua or GPD, I think the chief probably would ask for the same assistance as Sheriff Darnell is asking. But we know that we cannot, and I'm not willing to say much more when I have to see 1 million over the amount. That's astronomical. And so therefore, although we still want to hear from the sheriff's department, I just know that we cannot, and it's no need to sit here and have all of this discussion knowing we don't have this money. I'm sorry to say it as bluntly as I'm stating it, but the truth is what's going to come out in the wash.
I'm sorry.
Maybe for now. Thank you.
Ms. Griffin.
I just wanted to say that I would like to defer my comments until after I've heard Sheriff Darnell, and, but also thank the foresight that we aren't in the spots that a lot of counties are, because we've had the programs in the officers in our elementary schools for years, and that was you and Chief Jones and Dr. Boyd that came together and did that. And I just wanted to say that, you know, we've had a good working relationship for all these years, and I look forward to hearing your comments. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, I got some questions. And thank you for keeping our children safe, to the other agencies too. All right, first, I asked you in our meeting how many absences you had last year. Did you ever look that up? That was my first question.
Mr. Chair, and members of the board, let me say that this has been a real arduous process for all of us, and yes, we did. We said that we would get you back that information. I just asked my chief if we followed through on that, and he said no. So I apologize for that. We have been looking at it. We do have the data somewhere, and it just fell through the cracks with everything.
Yeah, it's
that's
important though when you ask for
You're
one.
absolutely right, and I apologize for that oversight, and there have been several. I have to admit, there's been some oversights through this putting together
I
the
appreciate that.
cost.
The other thing is, and thank you for your ratio, the national ratio, 1 to 6, that means you don't need 4, you need 3 sheriffs, sergeants. So we could reduce that right then.
I'm sorry, I'm having a
You
hard
said it was
time.
1 to 6, the ratio, so we just reduced that, the 4 supervisors, you have the 3. And then we do what the recommendation is.
You're saying
You're the
nothing?
one who said it, I didn't. You said the ratio, Ms. Roy asked you, you said the
1 to
ratio was
6.
1 to 6, so we
Right.
just, you don't need 4, you need 3. So that's a good place to save money right there. Other costs.
We have 3 sergeants.
Huh?
We have 3 sergeants listed here.
But you have 4 supervisors, you don't need those, you just go down to 3.
3 sergeants are the direct supervisors, and that's the 1 to 6
What's,
ratio.
it says 4 though, when the sheet you gave me.
One's a lieutenant who is a commander.
Oh, well then have 3 sergeants. I'm just saying, we're looking for a place, we're negotiating, I wanna keep you, I think you guys do a great
And I'm
job.
not here to to
Yeah, you are.
debate. If that is your perspective and you
All
disagree.
right, all right, that's fine, you're the one who said it, I just repeated what you
I
said.
did, and the ratio is 1 to 6 with 3 sergeants, 3
That's all
direct
you need.
supervisors.
That's all you need.
So
So,
I need a commander to supervise the sergeants.
oh, okay, and then who's gonna supervise him? Okay, other costs is that, we haven't even brought that in, we have to, we have costs to harden the school, am I right, Superintendent? So when we look at these costs, this is not the total cost for us, so we need to take that into consideration too. I mean, I'm just thinking that's something I think should be discussed too. I also, we brought up about, who brought up about working just the 10 months besides Everett? Okay, but you said, yeah,
And the point is school's in session for 10 months. When the sheriff calculates her cost, she calculates the cost on a 12-month salary.
okay, go to the microphone, that's fine.
Apologize. Sure.
Oh, sure.
And please jump in if I'm incorrect, but I think the difference is what, we need a deputy in the school 10 months of the year. But the sheriff is calculating her cost based on the cost to pay that deputy for 12 months of the year. And again, as I said earlier, she feels that there's a justification for that, and I'll let her speak to that if she wishes to. But if we were going to consider other options, for instance, if we wanted to hire our own employees, my guess is we would hire 10-month employees, as we do with our teaching staff. Whether that's feasible or not, that's just a decision, that's part of the consideration.
Consideration.
Thank you. That have to be made when you're looking at those options. But that's the only point.
That's all, okay, in our meeting, I asked it, how many hours are you contracted for? It's 2,080, which works out to 260 days. 10 months, counting training is 190 days for employees of Alachua County, which is 27% less than the 260. So I think we need to consider that 27% of the cost that you want comes out to about, I don't know, $250,000. So I think, these are the kinds of things I thought, and I asked us to look at it. You remember that conversation we had with that? Okay.
Mr. Chair, may I address your point?
Yeah, I mean, but you want training, I don't know how much training you need. I mean, we're giving you 10 days.
Well, if you want a certified law enforcement officer, whether it's one of the municipalities or one of the deputies, they are required, they are mandated by the state a certain number of training hours every single year. And in addition, for instance, as we speak, this week, we are holding active shooter training, ALICE training, also in Alachua County, and our deputies are not in the schools because they're involved in that training, teaching others, teaching the other deputies, and getting their skills honed so that they can go into the school year, hopefully, if we can get the contract done, fully trained. And I will attest to that our deputies are the best trained and the best equipped and the most committed to the program. It is a competitive process for them to be able to be even considered for the program, and then they go through a selection process. That's just not me saying that. That is FASRO,
Well, I'll
the
tell you
Florida
what.
Association of School Resource
Why don't you
Officers
itemize your training so we can-
have just nominated, and they won our school resource deputies as School Resource Bureau of the Year for the state of Florida. That is a huge distinction that I don't want to be lost in this conversation. We have to have our deputies well trained. In addition to the safe or security types of training, they are also trained in Stop the Bleed. They're trained in CPR, pediatric CPR. The requirement to have the autism, the spectrum for autism. They are required to be certified in critical incident training, to be certified in that. I require every one of our law enforcement personnel to do it. You don't get that in every county within the state of Florida. There is a cost, but you are getting a quality person in that school who is committed and dedicated
All right, can I?
to that position.
can I-
So
can I-
that's why they have got to be throughout the 12 months of the year. That question came up when we met individually. I addressed it, but I'm happy to address
Well,
it here
let me
in
address it.
public.
Let me address it. Instead of just going around saying they need training, since we were having this meeting, just like I asked for the absences, just like, because, you know, you itemize things. You told me you itemized things you didn't know you itemized, because you just took a program without looking at it. You remember that comment when we were leaving? I asked you why you were asking us for hand soap, charging us 83 cents for hand
The
soap.
hand sanitizer.
And you said, well, we really don't know why, we just, I just. Yeah, you did. All right, well, anyway, what I'm saying is, since we're going through this, and we want to stay with you, is why don't you itemize all this training?
Mr. Chair, the reason we do that is this sheet is used for other purposes other than to respond to the contract negotiation that we recently did. We keep track of how much our deputies cost to be outfitted, trained, and equipped.
I'm not asking for the
And we
outfitting.
amended
I'm
that
asking for the
information
training.
that we, may I answer the question?
I don't want anything but just training. I just want to know how much training, show it to us. Instead of just saying we need training. I made a suggestion, we'll give you 10 days. Let's say you say, this is how much the days it takes to be trained. And then we could sit there and say, well, that's true. I see what you're doing. Just like the absences, when you ask
Mr.
for.
Chair, I'm not going to debate the
No.
reason or the
Well, you
training.
should. You
I
should
know
explain
what
it.
the training is required for our deputies, and I make sure that they adhere to the
Okay,
level of
I got
standards
it.
for the state
I
of Florida.
just was asking you, just like I did for the absences, I'm asking, I thought it'd be, since you're charging us, because, we have teachers that have to get training too, and they don't get paid for it. We just, to justify it, because, we're stewards of the money, how we spend it. If you would just tell us the training, say, okay, this is the training that our officers are gonna have this year. And, it came to 25 days. That would be a lot better than saying 70 days. That, right now, you're telling us if you had the same contract a teacher had, that'd be 70 days for training.
Mr. Chair, we can get you that information. I'm
I
not prepared to
appreciate that.
speak to it today.
Hey, no, I understand.
But we can provide it to you
That'd
if
be
you'd like
great.
to have, you would be amazed at the type of training
Well, I'd
that's
love to see.
required.
I really would.
All right, we will get that
Thank
to
you,
you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Did see, other costs, that? And then I appreciated, you gave me, I asked for a depreciation, since you were charging us for a brand new car, 3 of them every year, and it came to $59,000. And I said, why wouldn't you depreciate it? Because I would think, because I said, why do you even need a car since you're at the school? And you said, this is their office. It's okay, this is their office, but they don't need the best car. So I said, why don't you depreciate it like businesses depreciate their stuff? We depreciate it here in the school board. So I think it went down to 45%, 45,000 for 59,000, am I correct?
Your suggestion was taken. It was a good suggestion. We had not thought of that, and we have since depreciated those vehicles.
I thought it was the cost went from 59 to 45. Am I correct?
You have the sheet in front of you.
Okay, is that correct? Okay. All right. You got it? I'm bad at finding it.
You suggested it, we did it, and this is
Yeah,
what we
I'm
submitted.
just thinking the depreciation wasn't what I thought it would be, though. That's all. I mean, to make sure I'm not just talking through my hat. 49, you see, I don't, that's pretty high for, I would think that the resource officers wouldn't need the best car you have to offer, like you want somebody on the road. I mean, that's me as a businessman, and I would think you would be thinking the same way. How much do we pay for the new car for, Ms. Superintendent?
I'm gonna defer that to Mr. Rella.
Mr. Rella?
For the vehicle for our security officer?
Yeah.
It was, I think, 26, but it wasn't necessarily outfitted in the same manner a standard issue
Okay.
sheriff's office car would be in Sheriff Darnell could
And that's a
probably
new
speak to
car.
that more like than I could. It's kind of just a base model
Yeah.
Ford Explorer.
But that's new.
Right, and we
Correct.
use the same state pricing mechanism that if the sheriff's office was going to buy the car, we are able to tag on to that state bid for the same
Yeah.
thing. So if she were to go and purchase a Ford Explorer, we pay the same base price, but then the additional lights and shields and bulletproof panels and things of that sort go into that cost.
All right, so I just want to go, so anyway, just let me read. I asked the absences, I wish I'd had it. I'm glad you'll get it for me. We met over a month ago though, right? So, but
That
I.
was, yes.
Yeah, I would think that would be a real simple thing to find. Total number of absences, I think that really, we really, don't need those 3 supervisors when your recommendation from your national organizations tell you you don't need it. And I'd like to find out how many, okay, I'm sorry, you guys, you ready?
Mr. Chair, we've got the information reference the times that the supervisors were pulled into the schools, and for Sergeant Lowe, and this is for the 2016-17 school year, he was pulled out of, the sergeant had to be in the school 82 days. The following year, 17-18, just the most recent school year, 36 days. Sergeant Kuntz for the 16-17 school year, he had to serve in the school 71 days. For the current, most recent school year, 17-18, 49 days. Sergeant Thomas for the school year 16-17, 50 days. And for the 17-18 school year, 0. Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate that. Well, I'm glad to 0, because we'd get by with the 3. But, so anyway, that's, well, just to refresh it, thank you for the absences. I would like to see, since you brought up the ratio, I'm just gonna use what you suggested. And I'd like to see how many days training. And, I'd like to see, really, I would like to see a little more money than $7,000 for depreciation, when that car's gonna sit there in a parking lot. I mean, and again, I like to take things like the hand soap, that's been taken off, right?
No.
Hand soap's still there for 83 cents?
Now, it's been taken off since it was such a lightning rod.
Well-
And so it has been taken off. We will eat the cost of the hand sanitizer.
Well, you told me you didn't know it was on there. You did tell me that. You said you ran a program and there were things on there you didn't know would be on there. But,
Mr. Chair, what I would suggest, if there's some counter offer you would like to make regarding the contract, I would be open to that.
Okay.
Rather than
oh, I can't
kind
do it
of
by myself, I have to meet with the board.
nickel and diamond it today. I think we need to have a more earnest, higher view conversation.
Sure.
Because candidly, Mr. Chair and members of the board, this has been a very frustrating process for all of us throughout the state. This is not something that any of us anticipated as this time last year, and we were thrust into it, and we've done the best that we could do. We're not alone. We can take some comfort in that, but I do want to make sure you understand that, you know, I want this to work. I have been committed and have demonstrated that my belief in having law enforcement in our schools will change our community for the good. And we have seen many, many outcomes with that, with our racial and ethnic disparity, where we're not arresting youth for misbehavior. We're recognizing that there is a difference. And so there's been many, many huge hurdles that we have learned from and gotten over. What we need to get through soon, because time is not on our side. It's less than a month, or just over a month, that school will be starting, and I want our deputies to be in those schools. I want us to be able to continue to have the consistency of a high-level program that many people envy and also parrot, because they want to model, you know, what we've done. I've had requests from sheriffs all over the state and school districts for information about what we're doing here. What we are quibbling about, speaking of my contract specifically, And I don't diminish your need to ask questions, but I think we've got some urgency here that we need to talk about the bigger picture issue of we need to find, from the purposes of my contract, so that the Board of County Commission doesn't impact my law enforcement budget, is $431,000. And if you look at the pie chart, the information that has been provided previously has been accurate. I'm not going to say that it's not accurate, but the cost amounts, for instance, the 42% that has been done in the past has been done as a percentage of the personnel cost only, not the full cost of the program. What has happened for decades is that the county has borne a disproportionate share of the burden of the cost of the program. And it wasn't until just recently, going back to 2014, that they started expressing dissatisfaction with that. I made it known to Superintendent Roberts at the time in a memo that the board was requesting 50% cost share of the entire cost of the program. Then in 2015, another memo, he and I had conversations, again this was the former Superintendent Roberts, that we would phase it in over a 3-year period to get to a 50% cost share, because my fear has been that the Board of County Commission will reduce my law enforcement budget if I don't work toward trying to find a more equitable cost share with you all as a board. The funding disagreement really is between you all and the Board of County Commission, but I'm concerned, and I'm expressing that concern repeatedly and again today, that I can't have my law enforcement budget reduced. And so I'm here to ask for the equitable sharing, the contracts that were signed by the other municipalities. I can't speak to that. They do look at their costs differently. They may be able to afford it. But I've got a 5-0 vote from my Board of County Commission that says they want a 50-50 split. Now what you have before you is some giving on that. We depreciated the vehicles, and that was a great idea, Mr. Paulson, that we appreciated.
Dr. Paulson.
Dr. Paulson, excuse me. Dr. Paulson. We appreciated those vehicles, and then we also, I've gotten at least an indications from Chair Pinkinson that the 45% is what's on the table now to try to get the costs down as much as we can. My difficulty is when you look at the rest of the state, and as I'm sure many of you have, that the rest of the state, the sheriffs and the school districts are either at or working genuinely toward a 50-50 cost share. When we look at that, for my contract, there's a difference of $431,000. What I mentioned to each of you when I met with you individually, because I don't like to bring a problem without a solution. Dr. McNeely, you pointed that out, that you appreciated that the solution that I see is for you to get the $431,000 out of any of the funds that were mentioned in the slide from Mr. Cottle, or tap into your reserves one time for a short time period. I have spoken with the Department of Education Safe School Director, Mr. Kelly. I've spoken to Senator Perry. I have spoken to my Florida Sheriff's Association. Everyone acknowledges that the Guardian money, the $67 million that has been set aside for the Guardian program, is not being fully used. There is going to be a significant amount of money left over, and that will be shifted over into the safe school allocation probably sometime in the fall or at the latest the end of the year. If you were to use whatever fund you choose, including looking at your reserve fund for the $431,000, you could pay it back mid-year. And also, if you wanted to renegotiate the contracts with the municipalities, you could. It's an option that I want you to consider. My fear is if you don't get your foot firmly in the door this year, you'll be left behind next year, and there's going to be more costs likely next year for the safe school funding. Your other option, and that's if you want us in your schools. The other options have been outlined to you in the slide in the presentation previously, but we're really talking about a difference of $431,000. to get us, our deputies, into the schools by the start of school year August 13th.
All right, from what I understand, we're doubling the amount that was at. Am I correct or am I wrong?
If you refer to, let me get to the correct page. That would be page 10 in Mr. Caudle's presentation. That gives you a breakdown of the 17-18 school year cost. He's going to put it up on the screen as well. So for ASO, as an example, based on what we paid last year was $332,000. Our proposal for this year was $679,000 and change. So it was a little more than double, so increase of 104.5.
And you're asking for how much now? Is there a reduction from last time? Are you asking for 1.4 million?
The amount now, if you, Dr. Paulson, if you go to page 11, the request now from ASO is $1,110,348, which according to the itemized sheet that came from ASO would represent 45% of the total cost. So that difference is about $430,000.
Okay, so, and I don't like the term quibbling, because if you're asking, I'm quibbling. We're both, neither one of us are quibbling, okay?
Okay, you use
That
your
wasn't a good
terms and
term.
I'll use mine.
Well, I don't appreciate it, so
That's
there.
okay, I recognize that.
All right, so, I think, you know, if they say, I'm just one member out of five, and I think Dr. McNeely, she made a good point about how much money that is. And we do need to get something settled, but we can't, I don't see it settling it right here. Do you, Ms.?
No, sir, unless you, at this point, prior to the school year beginning on the 13th, and generally the officers are in place in our schools during pre-planning. We have one board meeting, which would be on the 17th, so if there would want to be further discussion and a possible vote, that would need to go on the agenda to be published today at 5 o'clock for the meeting on the 17th. The next board meeting after that, unless we called a special meeting, although I know that there's some vacation schedules that might prohibit us to have a majority of the board here during that time, would be August 7th for a further discussion there. So those would be your scheduled board meeting options prior to the start of the school year, either next Tuesday or August 7th. Unless you wanted to call a special board meeting, I just don't know how. I don't know that you would have all 5 board members present between now and the 7th because of some travel schedules that have been previously.
I'd like to see, I wish you could have got the information to me sooner.
Mr. Chair. Okay. I wanted to say that, you know, as, like many of us up here, maybe all of us up here, I served as a teacher. And I have, and I think, since I was in the city of Gainesville, we had a GPD officer, so I've seen firsthand the positive impact of law professionals. So I do thank you, and your department for the years, for the decades, if you want to go back farther. I also just wanted to go on the record as saying, like, much of the difficulties that the county has, that the municipalities have, that school districts have, you know, you have to go up I-75 and then take I-10. And if we look at Tallahassee, as much as it is a step in the right direction, the Safe Schools Act, and Sheriff, you've talked about what is mandated. As what I'm seeing is mandated without the funding to meet the mandates. So and this is something that county, like I said, we're all in this boat, counties, municipalities, school districts. So I think it is crucial, no matter what we do, that the public understands that sort of this tango we're doing here is not anyone's choice. It's we're trying to figure out what's best for the children, and that includes, obviously, the sheriff's department, and I think this county commission, by what their record, has been stellar in their support of children in this community when you look at the Children's Services Council. So I'm not assigning bad motive to anyone, but that's the position that we're all in. And I do agree with the sheriff on the point of time is not on our side. And with that in mind, I'd like to request, if this is doable by staff, I'd like to request that this be on the agenda for July 17th. Thank you.
April, Ms. Griffin, excuse me.
I thank you for what you've said. I think that it comes down to, well, first of all, I think that the way that we're doing it now is better to distribute it per officer instead of per school. I think that everybody agrees on that. I think what the issue that we have, and going forward, if we could work on this, is how exactly we calculate what the cost is. And we talked in our meeting that we don't calculate the cost of teachers and add the training and add the pencils and add all of it. So this is a little distracting. And I understand that there are more costs associated with it than what, you know, but I think that when you give us a list like this, it's a little distracting because that's not how we think about our per teacher cost. So that's a little different. And the other thing is that whose job is it to make sure everybody's safe? It's our job to educate, and it's your job for the safety of the schools and all of our citizens. And I understand the difficult situation you're in with your budget, and we've talked about that before also. The other thing is that we're not alone. This discussion's going on across the state. You gave us in your pie chart, or in the deputies needed for the state. And like I said before, we're in a much better situation than other counties are. But I do want to mention that Sarasota County voted to start their own police force.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. They've recently changed that, as I understand.
I just talked to one of the board members last Thursday or Friday, and they've already hired almost all of the officers they need.
For the upcoming year?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So
that was news to me.
they have decided to go that way, and I'm not suggesting that at all. I mean, that's just, but going forward, if we're going to calculate the cost different, I think that all of the agencies need to get together and come up with a uniform cost per deputy. Just because we need to make sure that everybody's treated fairly and equitably. So if I'm encouraging you to meet with your other, with your colleagues to do that. And the other thing is, I spoke with the chief in High Springs, and they're thrilled that they get more money because they're not only gonna put an officer in our school, they're gonna put an officer at the private school that's up there at the church. So I think that, you know, it's the way we're looking at things is a little different. $430,000 doesn't sound like a lot. It really doesn't in the grand scheme of things. But the precedent is what I'm worried about. And that goes to what Dr. McNeely said. And also this year, we have the extra money. What happens if the state cuts the funding? We're giving every penny of our safe school money, besides the salary, to our law enforcement agencies. That doesn't leave us any money to harden the schools. It doesn't leave us any money for video and all of the other technical things that they want us to put in. Or the mental health is another issue, but it's still all tied in together. And we're not guaranteed anymore next year. And from what we've heard in my state level position, is that there's not going to be more money for the next 2 years, not just for this, but overall. So I think we need to be very frugal and look at things before we just say dip into the reserves. The other thing that we just found out, and Superintendent Clark shared with us, is the lowest 300 schools. They've added another one on our list with no funding for that. So we are going to have to come up with the money to extend the day at the extra school with no funding. And that's double what the 400. So it's not just, this isn't the only thing that we're being asked to do, is what I'm saying. So all of those things in consideration, I think that we still have some talking to do, and I appreciate you coming, and I appreciate the work. Like I said, this program is unprecedented in the state, and we are so fortunate to have had it implemented and not have to get 40 officers. Yeah. So I thank you, but those are just my concerns and looking at, and I've thought about this a long time. So we need to, going forward, like Mr. Hyatt said, when we get this done, we need to start for next, and not wait until the end of the school year to start talking about it. And I understand that this year was different with the law, but anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just to respond, reference the detail in the chart. We get scrutinized a great deal and criticized if we're not completely transparent. So the detail was done well-intentioned to provide complete transparency. If we had given you a number, a lump sum, you know, the question would be, what does it consist of? And so we just thought we'd go ahead and provide it to you. I understand there was some reaction to it, but it is what it is, and it costs a lot to outfit a deputy. What's not included here is what you're getting, experienced deputies. You know, the deputies in our schools from my agency average 10 years. Supervisors average 7 years of experience. We recently lost someone who had 19 years experience. And that experience is very, very valuable, but you can't necessarily put a price on it, except it does show up in their salary as they go through the steps. I'll be more than happy to meet, especially with Chief Jones, because they make more money. They start at base rate more money than we do. And so that unfortunately may inflate or increase our cost projection. But our retirements are different, and so that's going to be hard to completely quantify to the level that you may be asking, especially in time for the next meeting. One other point I would like to add is the one cost that is a huge cost, a significant cost. I don't know if y'all had a chance to price it out, but the cost of liability insurance. We mentioned that during our one-on-one meetings and with the superintendent, that the cost of liability insurance for an employee, should you choose one of the other options, is going to be an extreme cost. That comes with the deputy as part of my office. It's included. It's not included in the cost that's reflected here. But if it were, it would be a huge amount, and I would encourage you to try to get an estimate of what that liability coverage would be, just to put it in context that you're getting a deal. Even though it looks like a lot, it feels like a lot, it is a lot, but it is necessary to have the kind of equipment and training, and it is what it is. And when you look at where we are, Ms. Griffin, I really appreciate you pointing out that when you look at where Alachua County is, the school board of Alachua County is, compared to many of the other, most, if not all, of the school districts throughout the state, you're paying for an additional 6 deputies. 2 that I'm asking for, the substitutes in my budget request, and the 3 sergeants and the lieutenant that you have not paid for. In comparison to many other districts that are paying for a number of positions in the 2-digit range. So I've tried to be as reasonable. I believe it is a fair, proportionate share, and even with the Board of County Commission coming down from 50% to 45%, it's very generous on their part to do it. But in the interest of trying to get to 50-50 next year is, I think, something that is reality, that's gonna have to happen, and I do believe that the money from the Guardian program being shifted into the Safe School allocation is gonna be available to you if you take advantage of it this year. My fear is if you don't take advantage of it this year, but talk to the people that advise you from the allocation. If you don't get your foot in the door this year, you may not be able to get in next year, my perspective. But I would encourage you to talk to those of you who have people that can advise you from Tallahassee's perspective. One other point, and then I'll sit down, or if you want me to continue to answer questions, I will. You've got a sales tax initiative that's coming forward in the fall. There are going to be some people in our community that are going to look at the county, therefore many of them who are voters, carrying the disproportionate share of the cost for this program. To me, if you move closer toward a proportionate share, that would help you in your efforts to go forward with the sales tax referendum.
Ms. Roy?
Thank you. I'd like to say that there's no question about the quality of service that SRO provides to the schools. We understand that. Where the problem here is the disparity between the agencies, and that's why I think Ms. Griffin's suggestion was that you get together and decide how you, allocate your money, and would help us. I do appreciate your itemizing everything, and I do appreciate the fact that you took some things off, like the Stetson hats, and which was quite expensive.
That was a complete.
And you did bring it down a little bit. But there's some misunderstanding. For example, the Florida Sheriff's Association, you've mentioned the state a number of times today. And they sent a letter, their attorney sent a letter saying over and over and over that it's the school's responsibility, not the sheriff's, the schools. But then it says in here, additionally, school districts are empowered to raise their millage rate to meet increased budget demands. That is not true. I don't understand how your attorney, or not yours, but the state's attorney, could be so wrong about this, because we are not like the city and the county. We cannot decide our millage. It is set by the state. So that's one thing. I agree that your officers need to be fairly compensated, but when we're looking at what the money that is requested is, we have to think about our own expenses and our own teachers. I'm not willing to, and employees, I'm not willing to lowball our employees to pay more than other agencies are asking for the service. So there's one other thing I think needs an explanation here that I'm quite confused about, and that's this Newberry MSTU share and all of that, the Newberry officer deputy services. So I wonder if someone could explain that, how that impacts what your request is.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Rory, I don't understand your question. Newberry does not pay into the MSTU
No, they pay you.
for law enforcement.
Right, they pay you directly.
They pay, we're currently under contract
That's what
negotiation.
Mrs. Roy's talking about.
Right. We have a contract with the city of Newberry to provide law enforcement services, which includes patrol, school crossing guard, as well as the school resource deputies. But that's separate and apart from the law enforcement MSTU.
But how much is that, Ms. Roy?
I'm not sure. 123,000 and 18? No, I don't, I've got something here, but I don't understand it.
138,115 for total school resource deputy service.
And that's in your figures, hasn't been taken out.
I
So-
don't think, that's not my figure.
What, I
This,
don't understand, is this one of your, are these officers included in the 18 that
Yeah,
we're being billed for?
yes.
Oh, you may be, are you looking at the pie chart?
Here, I'll give them.
No, I'm
Foxton.
looking at this,
The
which we
worksheet from the city.
received.
If you will take a minute, well, let me see what you've got there.
Sheriff, that's a copy of the worksheet from the city of Newberry's with y'all's negotiation
This
for
is
that.
from new. Mr. Chair, Ms. Roy, this is not my calculation. This is from the city of Newberry, Manager New.
But
So I cannot,
do they give you money for those offices?
do they give me, yes, we
Yes.
have a contract through the city of
Yeah, we-
Newberry.
Right, and but you're also charging us the whole price for those officers is what the question is. So what I think Mrs. Roy's getting at, the superintendent, just correct me if I'm wrong, is that that was not taken out of your total cost.
So we're paying twice
Right,
They're
okay.
getting-
for the
they're
same
getting paid for it
officers.
twice.
Right, I understand where you're going. Okay, the cost that Newberry provides for their school, their law enforcement services is a large number. I believe it's $800,000 this year. And that includes the 24-hour, 7 days a week patrol shifts, school crossing guard, as well as some special event coverage, and then the 3 school resource deputies. The portion they pay for the school resource deputies is not a full cost. It is a portion of the cost that goes toward these positions. So they're paying some for that deputy
But then, right.
in their school, right, but they're not paying a complete amount.
Well, I was just wondering why that amount is not subtracted from what you're asking us to pay, since they are paying for a portion of their deputies. There are 3, did you say?
Okay.
That was my question.
I don't believe I'll be able to answer it to your complete satisfaction, but you're paying a portion currently. The 42% is only of personnel services, so you're paying for a portion of a school resource deputy. They're paying some more in addition to that, but it's still not a complete 50% that we need to try to achieve.
Okay, and the other thing I would say, since I have the floor here, is I would agree with Mr. Hyatt that we have it on the agenda for the 17th, and that we have a vote, because as everybody has said, we're at the very moment of having to decide something for next school
Yeah,
year.
I totally
We can
agree.
absolutely
I need
do
to
that.
know in case it doesn't work out, then I've got to make some decisions about where to place
Absolutely.
people.
Could we have?
We all need to adjust if
Understood.
it doesn't work out.
I think we might need to get maybe an executive session.
Quite possibly, I know that we had discussed the option
do
of
that.
that. If we could potentially, and our board attorney would have to, would this qualify as something, since it is budgetary and would impact salary, monies available for salary negotiations? Could we have an executive session solely on this topic?
I will look into that for you. I just want to double check. I don't want to advise it,
Sure.
you know, hurt us in the long run. So I will look into that and I'll get back to you guys on that.
Okay, appreciate that, thank you.
And
Dr. Paulson, I would like to hear from David on the full effect, but in terms of talking about our security plan for the district, those are reasons why we can go into a closed session for discussion. So obviously, if we don't have an agreement with the sheriff's office, how we're going to secure our schools and comply with the law is something that we're going to have to decide. And those really, once we get down into specifics with schools, those aren't public conversations. Those are things to be done in private.
so what are you saying exactly?
I'm saying that I think we can meet to discuss the security in our schools privately. It does not have to be.
And I think it'd be beneficial to do it before the board.
Right, so if we can arrange that with the board, if that's convenient for all board members, Rose will confirm that with all of you. And once we are able to confirm with Attorney Delaney, if that's a definite that we are allowed to do that, we could do that prior to the board meeting.
It would just be the scope of the meeting. I mean, we can definitely talk about our security plans for the district, not in public, because obviously you don't want to share your security plans with, but whether we can then go into the budgetary stuff on top of that is something that I want to talk to David about too. So.
Yes, Dr. McLean.
This question is for the sheriff. I'd like to know, just in case that we cannot agree on the contract that you would like for us to have, because if we're going to do a vote on July 17th, I'd like to know the implication as to what will your department be considering at that point. I need to know that.
Mr. Chair, Dr. McNeely, the situation would be actually up to the Board of County Commission. If you were not to renew the contract and there is not funding in my budget to cover the school resource deputies, and they choose to reduce my law enforcement budget by that amount or some amount close to that, because I'll try my best to justify keeping some of those positions because we desperately need them in other areas, then they would reduce my law enforcement. They likely could reduce my law enforcement budget, and I'll deal with it as best I can. But that's going to be a decision truly on the 17th, that if y'all vote one way or the other, that then is going to go into the Board of County Commission's decision-making, because it has to do with a funding issue. But my fear, and the reason I'm here to try to convince you to keep this and to work something out over the $431,000, again, recognizing that some money's coming out of the Guardian program to go in the Safe School allocation, likely mid-year, to go ahead and commit to that so we can get into schools. Otherwise, if you don't renew the contract, the board may likely reduce my law enforcement budget by that amount or something similar, and I'll have to make changes in structure within my agency.
Thank you.
So let's define, well, we're trying to get to 50%, but the question is, what is 50% of, 50% of what? Am I correct?
Yes, however, the sheriff's definition of 50% would be represented on
No, I understand, I just want
this
to,
long exhibit.
but right, when we disagree
B.
with that, is where we're at right now.
Okay.
I want to be
Right.
clear, that's all. We disagree how you've calculated the cost, total cost that we'll have to get 50%, right?
Correct, yes, if I'm understanding what you were saying, yes, that is a correct statement.
Because if we're gonna go back, and you asked me, right, a little while ago, that we should come back with some kind of counteroffer to you. That's why I was asking about an executive session.
Right.
Mr. Chair, I would not know where to reduce. Those are actual costs that I seem to be
Well, you're
fair
not
and reasonable.
bargaining with
You may
faith.
want to consider talking about a counter proposal. I'm just trying to work something out.
Right, that's what, I'm just trying to be clear. So we could go in, so we can get back to you, because this is a serious situation. And I just want to know, I don't want to go into a meeting and then sit there and go, hey, how you doing today? We're trying our best. That's why I've looked at all these things so closely. That's why I asked you for all that information. So we can go back, we will look at it as a board with our staff and see what we can do. Does everybody agree with that?
And Mr. Chair, what I would also recommend is that there be some discussion with you all, with the Board of County Commission, about what they would find to be a tolerable level. Because I've given you my cost, what I see to be the actual cost, and I risk losing a portion of my law enforcement budget if you don't fund it. So if you could work out a compromise with the Board of County Commission that is suitable for them,
So let's get this clear then. We're not dealing with you, we're dealing with the county commission.
from a funding standpoint, yes, sir.
So if we tell them how much we can offer, that's who we go to?
Well, I think at this point, the sheriff's concerned that if we don't agree to this part, so in essence, she is kind of the middle person here.
Right.
Whereas she's got to negotiate a contract with us, but then has to work with the county commission for her budget separately. So
What if the
if
county
we,
commission agrees with us, then what happens with you?
They've made it clear with a 5-0 vote that they would like a 50-50 cost share.
And we're saying the difference is 50-50 of what? Am I correct, fellow board members?
Yes.
Yes or no? You-
I understand that, yes.
Yes, okay. So if we're gonna be doing this in good faith, we need to know who we're dealing with. You agree with that?
Correct. So,
It's confusing.
right, so depending on, assuming we are able to do the executive session on the 17th, following the board meeting on the 17th with what the board wants to do and wants to commit financially, then at that point, we could have a discussion with, obviously, we would send that information to Sheriff Darnell, but then also have a conversation with the county commission. I could certainly reach out to the county manager, interim county manager, to have that discussion, and then if there needs to be, discussion between the chairs, whether it's a meeting, a full meeting of both 8 groups together, we would have to cross that bridge after whatever
We need to
decision
get
is on the
some
17th.
clarification who we're dealing with and what we're dealing with. That's all I'm saying.
All right,
I mean,
Mr.
we
Chair,
go
from
to the
a
board,
contract
they-
standpoint, you can deal with me, but when you say 50% of what, I've given you the best I can and been criticized for giving you too much information.
We disagree. That's what we're saying.
So
You said
what
50
would you say?
That's why we're meeting.
What would you like? What would you
Sheriff, please,
suggest?
let me be clear.
No, what
We're-
would
we're
you
gonna-
suggest?
God help me. We're gonna go and get together. I can't tell you that. I don't have that authority. We have five board members. We have a superintendent. That's why I asked for an executive session. We will go into the executive session and then we could give you a counter. For me to give you a counter now, do I use the word presumptuous or do I use the word illegal? We can't do that. And you know that. So what we need to know is who we're dealing with. In other words, I'm just confused. Are you confused?
Well, I think at this point, what we can do is if we present, and Sheriff, correct me if I'm wrong, following the meeting on the 17th, with what the board's decision would be, then we would provide that counteroffer to you directly first, and then that conversation would then be, if it's obviously less than this $430,000, then that conversation would then occur between you and your county commission to discuss that piece of the funding source and how they're going to impact your budget.
That's
Is
right.
that correct? Okay.
That's right.
Thank you. And then the next question is, Mr. Moore, could we call a special session of our school board session?
We can call a special meeting of the school board,
Because
yes.
this might require some, this is one time, something like that might,
And it's my understanding we do have a special meeting, budgetary meeting, I think it's the 24th. I know Mr. Hyatt won't be here for that. So
Well,
we have that one, we can always add something to that
we can find
agenda.
someone, Mr. Hyde will be here.
Right,
as soon
and
as
then, but
possible.
we can always call a special meeting with 48 hours
Or he
notice.
could come in by phone or something like that, okay? But I'm saying, all I'm trying to do is be clear, so we make a good faith effort to make this happen. I mean, if we left here without all this cleared up, we're just spinning our wheels.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
if I could address the sheriff.
go ahead, sure.
Thank you. Sheriff Darnell, would you be willing, I know you've met with us individually, can I call your assistant and set up, because I'd like to discuss some things, and I'm sure that would be available for any board member, but just, for my clarity, I'd like to bring up a couple of things, and if I do that before going into executive session, I'm certainly not gonna ask you for a decision on the spot, but what I'd like to do is just discuss a couple of options, so,
I would welcome that, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, Mr. Hyatt, Dr. Hyatt, I don't know.
no, Mr.
Specialist,
Okay.
Don't put the pressure on me.
specialist.
But I would be willing, members of my staff, anytime, anywhere before the 17th, morning of the 17th, to answer any of your questions and concerns and
So I
explain
can
it.
contact your executive assistant, and we'll get that set up.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
That's me.
Karen Clark.
Yes, that's me, sorry.
So who's this KC? KC Sunshine Band?
That's me. If I may address the sheriff, is there a possibility that prior to the 17th that we could get via email or however, the absences that you shared, that you shared via message there. The absences for the past 2 years, so we can see that. And then also when they talked about the training, if there's a
We did, we got
sample
that.
type training thing, and obviously if there's a way to break that down between fall and spring, because I know in the past, my officers had to leave schools to do a monthly training or, recertify at the gun range or hostage or whatever. And then what's done during the summer.
Sure, I'm
Okay.
happy to do that.
Anything else? 'Cause we want. Okay, that's good.
Just one more.
Mrs. Roy.
Thank you. We don't have any guarantee of getting the Guardian money. You say that probably it will come into our budget, but we don't know, we can't count on getting that. And so I just wanted to put that out there.
Mr. Chair, I would say that I guaranteed you won't get it unless you ask for it, and that's something that has to be done through your body as well as through your association to make sure you demonstrate a need. When the people I have talked to, and again, that's the Department of Education, Safe School Director, Mr. Damian Kelly, Senator Keith Perry, and our Florida Sheriff's Association representation, that the Guardian money there's going to be a significant amount left over, and it likely will be allocated using the same formula for those counties and school districts. Well, it would be school districts because the allocation would come to you all that demonstrate the need. But there are going to be a lot of school districts asking for that money. That's why I'm sharing with you my concern that if you don't make it known that you may need additional money from that Guardian money being shifted, then you may miss out because other people will request it and encumber it before you all do.
Everybody needs it.
Let me give you an
Everybody in
example
the state
of
needs it.
counting on that money. All right. We have a legislator, I won't mention the name. We went in 2 years ago thinking we were gonna get a millage of 4.9%. And that legislature was on one of the conferees, and we came out with 4.66%, or $3.17 million less. So that's why we're a little skittish about that. I think it's a good example. So, but I think, again, once we get to what 50-50 is, then we can go. We just got to see if we can come to an agreement. That's why I think we have a plan, right? At least we're not leaving everything up in the air. That's what I was afraid of. All right?
And Mr. Chair, if I may, I know we all have busy schedules, but if we could have the executive meeting, it may work out the 17th is the only time we could do it, but if we could have it earlier, that would be.
I think it'd be better.
That would be okay.
Yeah, that way. Mr. Chair, my deputy chief would like to say a few
Sure,
words,
go ahead.
address the board.
Dr. Paulson, board members, superintendent, if your next meeting is the 17th and you're going to make a vote then I would strongly encourage, I've had some experience in this, that we have some negotiation with the person that you appoint on your side, meet with us, and we can have some negotiation about what might be acceptable to your side and what would be acceptable. So there's a plan, so then when it comes back to the board on the 17th, you can vote on those options, whether it be an option or a plan that's being proposed that was somewhat agreed between your representative and our representative.
I think you have a good point. I think that's why we need to get the executive session earlier than the 17th.
Yes, sir.
Because the person that goes to meet with you needs
Needs
to
to have
needs to have something that they can offer you.
Exactly.
Right, I
And
think,
the same
good
here.
point, and your point's well taken.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, David. Mr. Chair, anything else?
No, I think it's been a good meeting. Maybe you don't feel the same, but I thought it was.
Karen's light's still on.
Karen?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Casey and the sunshine,
I'm
okay.
sorry.
No, I think it was a good meeting, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you, guys. All right, this meeting's adjourned.